Good evening, you're watching Gravitas and I'm Sana Khan. On the big discussion tonight, in a significant development, the United States have moved the United Nations to ban Pathankot air-based terror attack mastermind and Pakistan-based Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Maulana Masood Azhar. The US, supported by the United Kingdom and France, is said to have moved a proposal at the UN Sanctions Committee 1267 to proscribe Azhar. What does this mean for India? Why the interest from the US now? And why is China blocking such efforts? To discuss this, we are joined in this evening by Mr. James M. Dorsey, who's a senior fellow at the RSIS. He joins us live from Singapore. Mr. Hardeep Singh Puri. Mr. Puri was India's permanent representative to the United Nations, serving 4 years in that post. He brings deep insight into the working of the UN, including agencies like the Security Council. Here in the studio, I have with me Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former diplomat, as well as Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia Program. He joins me live from Washington. Let's take a look at this report now. They did it before and they've done it again. Even though Islamist terrorist Maulana Masood Azhar's group Jaish-e-Mohammed has been banned by the United Nations, the terrorist himself has been spared the fate for the second time by China, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Azhar roams about free in Pakistan, where he regularly spews hatred in fiery anti-India speeches. And Pakistan is, after all, China's closest ally. Our senior international correspondent Padma Rao gets us this report.
It was introduced by former US President Barack Obama and is possibly one of the few moves backed by current US President Donald Trump so far. The United States resolution to ban Maulana Masood Azhar, an Islamist terrorist on India's most wanted list, found favor with most members of the United Nations Security Council, both within the Big Five and its rotating ones, all except one, India's big neighbor, China. And given that this is the second time that Beijing cast its veto against proscribing the Pakistan terrorist, it came as no surprise.
We have been informed of this development and we have taken up this matter with the Chinese government.
Maulana Masood Azhar was born and raised in Pakistan. He is also an Islamic scholar from a Karachi madrasa, considered the launchpad of innumerable Islamist terrorists. After fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan, Azhar embarked upon his bloody career by raising the Jaish-e-Mohammed, a group already banned by the United Nations. Dramatic scenes followed a hijack of an Indian jet to Kandahar in 1999, when Azhar had to be released in exchange for the airplane and its passengers. The last India saw of him was his departure from the aircraft in a jeep with armed Taliban, speeding away into the horizon like something out of a macabre Hollywood movie. Subsequently, Azhar launched a 14-hour attack on India's parliament in 2001, in which 6 police personnel were killed. He was also behind a raid on an Indian airbase in Pathankot in 2016. China has invested $46 billion in Pakistan and views Azhar's home, Pakistan, where he roams free and preaches hatred, as an ally. Instead of admonishing Pakistan for harboring Islamist terrorists, many of whom have fueled the Islamist uprising even in China's own Xinjiang province, Beijing has preferred to back armed Pakistani militants, at least as long as they continue to keep their guns and their venomous speech trained at China's rival and Asian superpower, India. Padma Rao, WION.
Once again, I welcome all the guests and thank them for joining us here on the show tonight. Let me start with you, Mr. Puri. Let's first get a sense from him as to how important is it for India to get Azhar banned. Will the UN ban enable India will the ban enable India to get his hands on him?
Well, it is important to the extent that an organization and an individual which have been very well known and established as terror outfits, and a person who has been personally responsible for carrying out acts of terrorism against India, it defies all logic that the United Nations Security Council's 1267 committee should not sanction him. Now, the last attempt to sanction Maulana Masood Azhar was a proposal mooted by the United States on the last day of the Obama administration, in fact on the 19th of January. And this proposal to sanction this entity was supported by Britain and France. So here are three members of the Security Council who moved this proposition, and I think it is a pity that that China continues to place a technical hold on this proposal. Your second question, whether this will enable us to get a hold on him, well, I don't want to indulge in wishful thinking, and I don't want to mislead your viewers. It is unlikely that Pakistan, which has been sponsoring state terror and acts of terrorism against India, it is unlikely that Pakistan will agree to hand over a person like Azhar to India or to any other international authority, because clearly he enjoys the support of the Pakistani state institutions like the ISI. So I'm doubtful on whether this will help. But in the first instance, we have to make efforts and renew our efforts to get the 1267 committee to sanction it.
Right. All right, Mr. Puri, hold that thought. If I can come to you, Mr. James Dorsey now. How significant is America's move to get Maulana Masood Azhar banned? What do you think?
Well, I think it's significant in the sense that this is an organization that has already been banned, and therefore it is logical that its leaders would be banned. Is this the highest U.S. priority? I don't think it is. I think it's a process that has been going on. It's not the first time that it has been attempted. It's not the first time that China has blocked that. And I think we will see that repeated again when it comes up in 6 months' time, 6 to 9 months.
All right. It's quite interesting how things are really shaping up. Ambassador Mukherjee, what will it take for China to appreciate India's concerns, vis-a-vis terrorism that is emanating from Pakistani soil, or perhaps when it comes to specific terrorists who've been named and, alleged to be involved in these attacks according to intelligence?
Well, I don't see that happening, really, because as things stand, I agree with both the panelists who spoke just now. My colleague Hardeep, in fact, is intimately acquainted with our efforts to get the United Nations to do what is actually very clearly necessary to ban the leaders of these organizations, which have already been banned, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba. As our representative at the UN, he personally led that fight. The thing is, China is committed to Pakistan. I mean, they describe it as an all-weather relationship and so on. It's committed to Pakistan. Now, of course, with the huge investment they're making in the economic corridor going through Pakistan to the warm water port that they now have access to.
Right.
More than that, it's part of their strategic plan to, while at the same time they are a very strong economic partner of India, to contain India strategically, as part of their overall very clear strategic objective to be the strongest power in Asia before they become one of the powers in the world. I mean, their plan to be the power that calls the shots in Asia is part of, the containment of India politically, in which Pakistan plays a very important part. So I agree with the panelists that this is not going to happen now. This is not going to happen in the future. They will, as long as there is this rule allowing China to veto efforts by the other members of the Security Council, they will continue to use this, and they will explain it away by saying that it's a technical hold, not enough evidence has been given, we need to, study this and so on and so forth. But the motivation is clear, and it's not going to change in the immediate future.
Their stance is going to remain the same. Michael, I would like to get you into this discussion of what do you think? Why the rush for this ban, and what does it really mean?
Well, I mean, I think clearly China, as we've heard before from the other panelists, this is an indication of the degree of comity that China has with Pakistan, that it's going to do something that it ordinarily would not want to do. Clearly, China does not have an interest in a terrorist like Masood Azhar living free and being able to do what he'd like in Pakistan, given that China is so deeply invested in Pakistan with CPEC and then many other investments as well. I think we all agree that not much is going to change. The calculus is not going to change in the immediate term. Maybe not in the immediate term, the initial term or the medium term, it's not going to change. But, you know, you have to look about what could be done down the line. And, you know, the question is what could be done to get China to change its thinking on this issue.
Right.
What about trying to shame China? I think that China is clearly in the minority. There's no one else in the Security Council that would side with China's decision to block this, this attempted ban. What about if India were to try to send more terrorists to the UN to try to get them banned as well? And, you know, if China's in a position where it needs to keep vetoing and vetoing and vetoing, you know, it makes China look pretty bad. And China is not the type of country that feels that it can disregard issues of reputation on the global stage. So, you know, that's one thing to look at down the road. And the other thing more broadly is that we shouldn't think that China will simply remain consistent with its position forevermore. I think, you know, China recognizes, or it should recognize, that all terrorists, particularly in Pakistan, regardless of which group they represent, they're all cut from the same cloth. And clearly, you know, you could have members of Jaish-e-Mohammed jump ship and go over to a terrorist group like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi or the Pakistani Taliban that does stage attacks inside Pakistan and stages attacks on a CPEC infrastructure or Chinese workers. So you would think, maybe I'm being too hopelessly optimistic here, with time, China would recognize that its interests are not served by continuing to take this stubborn position of not siding with everyone else in sanctioning the likes of Masood Azhar.
Michael got both the points that you're trying to make. Mr. Dorsey, would you agree with what Michael just said? And also, what does the ban really need to be followed up with? Is there a need, something that can be done beyond the ban?
Well, I think several things. First of all, I think that the Chinese are very uncomfortable about this already. And so the prediction that there's nothing going to change, I think, may be a bit premature. Obviously, the Pakistanis felt strongly enough about Masood Azhar for the Chinese to have at least twice vetoed this already. But on the background, what is happening is that the Chinese are making very clear to the Pakistanis that they're not very happy about it. I think the problem that you have in Pakistan is that there's a split within the government, or within the state, if you wish, with some parts of the government, the foreign ministry, for example, wanting to see Masood Azhar banned, or in any case, not having a problem with that. And other parts, those parts with whom Masood Azhar is the most closely aligned, having until now defended him. And then underlying that problem is that you have had, and this goes back many, many years, a development and a furthering of an ultra-conservative worldview, of which the India issue and the Kashmir issue are only part, that has woven itself into the fabric of some of the institutions of the government. And that makes, of course, the whole issue much more complicated.
Indeed. I'm going to request all you gentlemen to please stay on with me just for the benefit of our viewers. Let's just spell it out. Who is Masood Azhar? Well, he is the founder and leader of Jaish-e-Mohammed. It is a Sunni terrorist group dedicated to uniting Kashmir with Pakistan and the imposition of a strict Sharia law. Azhar has a history of involvement with militant and terrorist activities. In fact, he was active with the Harkat-ul-Ansar in the Afghan Jihad. In 1994, Maulana Masood Azhar travelled secretly to Srinagar to broker peace between two militant groups. In April of 2000, his group carried out the first known suicide attack in Kashmir, and now he is wanted in India for conspiring in the attack on Parliament, his group also carrying out the bombing of the Kashmir Legislative Assembly. The Jaish has been listed as a foreign terrorist organization by the US State Department, and in 2002 he was even banned by the then President Pervez Musharraf. However, it continued to function with the covert support of Pakistani intelligence agencies. The Jaish has since targeted US and Afghan forces in Pakistan. With that, let me go across to Mr. Puri now. Mr. Puri, on China, I know we've talked about this briefly, touched it with Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee here, but what is China's interest in supporting Pakistan in this case? Because China too, as we all know, is a victim of Islamic insurgency.
Well, China's actions are, to say the least, counterproductive. And they are not even in China's own interest. China, I don't think, has any interest. It is carrying out a technical hold. They did this in 2016. and they're repeating it now in 2017, essentially because of the all-weather friendship that China has with Pakistan. But in the ultimate analysis, as you yourself have pointed out, China has a similar terrorist problem in its own country, and not taking action against Azhar or standing in the way of him being sanctioned, I think sends a very bad signal, including to groups which are operating inside China. And I think over a period of time, China might come to regret this sooner rather than later.
Right. Ambassador Mukherjee, you know, there have been some media reports saying that China might itself be considering its stance vis-a-vis, you know, Pakistan and, you know, the terrorists, the insurgency that it's facing from within. Do you think that China may be looking at a possibility of any time soon spelling it out to Pakistan, saying that this is going to be our stand from here on?
Well, unlike one of the panelists who just spoke, I'm a pessimist on that. I don't think so. I have seen absolutely no evidence so far of China being under such a threat from terrorism, Islamic jihadist terrorism, which it knows whether or not it emanates directly from Pakistani soil. Pakistan is the fount of state-sponsored terrorism, so there's almost always a Pakistani footprint. But whether they will get worried enough to actually abandon their stakes in Pakistan, which is extremely useful to China at the moment for various political and strategic reasons. I don't see any evidence of that. Secondly, if there is this problem, and there is of course a problem of China itself having an internal problem which may grow of Islamic terrorism, and where there is a Pakistani connection, or whether Pakistan could become useful in, you know, for China in that regard,
right.
They would take the same position as, in fact, the United States does. They continue to support Pakistan militarily and economically, even though no nation in the world, not even India, has such excruciating evidence of Pakistan's state sponsorship of terrorism that the United States does, because of certain strategic challenges. The US will not name and shame Pakistani terrorists, organizations, or Pakistan as a state sponsoring terrorism for obviously for well-known reasons of the need for, you know, Pakistan's help vis-a-vis Afghanistan, right. Pakistan being a nuclear state, and the US wanting to remain engaged to keep an eye on that, and the so-called, the usefulness which some, I think, in the US government policymakers feel that Pakistan could come in useful as a contact point. The government and ISI could come in useful as a medium for contacting other terrorist groups, right. Which is an argument I don't agree with, and many don't agree with, but that does play out. So I don't see any evidence of China changing its stance
because of the high stakes in the region.
Because on balance, right. It finds Pakistani extremely useful directly, as well as in their efforts to make sure that India never poses a strategic threat to its efforts to you know, call the shots in Asia.
Right.
And later on, you know, match the United States in terms of global politics as well.
All right, Mr. Dorsey, let me come to you. You've written extensively about people like Masood Azhar. How many more times do you think China would be prepared to use this technical hold that it seems to every time latch onto?
Let me, if I may, I just want to pick up on something which Ambassador Mukherjee said, and would like to differ with him. I don't think that the issue for the Chinese in terms of Pakistan is a threat that militants would be operating across the border. On the contrary, what the Chinese are trying to attempt, and one can question whether that will succeed, is that they believe that it cannot, that one infrastructure linkage as well as economic development in Pakistan itself will help them further economically develop Xinjiang, the troubled province in northwest China, and that's how they're going to solve the problem of the Uyghurs. I personally think that's not going to work. For the Chinese overall, they need a stable situation inside Pakistan. They're investing a great degree of money in infrastructure, Chinese companies, Chinese personnel, and that are at risk, and there have been incidents already. And so for them, the problem is much broader than just a cross-border issue.
Right.
And so I see them, I don't see them continuously protecting Azhar.
All right. Let's hold that thought and move on for a bit. Now, let's see why the United States is acting now. Masood Azhar, well, he remains protected by China. For the third time, it has blocked a move by India to have him blacklisted by the UN for his terror activities. But the US administration now appears to be on India's side, moving a proposal to freeze Azhar's assets and restrict his travel. Take a look.
India's diplomatic battle to have terrorist mastermind Masood Azhar on the United Nations blacklist predictably hit the Great Wall of China for the third time. What made it different, though, was the US, UK and France moving a proposal in the UN Sanctions Committee to proscribe Azhar. Reports say the proposal was finalized after consultations between Delhi and Washington. It described the Jaish-e-Mohammed as a designated terror outfit. Therefore, its leaders cannot be allowed to go scot-free. The proscription would have frozen Azhar's assets and banned his movements. The question is, what prompted the US to step in this time on Azhar? Indian diplomats say this proposal was initiated by the Obama administration. The Trump administration supported it, perhaps thinking that an early reach out to India would help build the bilateral relationship and also help counter China. Bureau Report, WION.
Now, the next question I want to take on all the guests on the show. I start with you, Mr. Puri. Why has it got involved now? Because the resolution was passed by the Obama administration on the 19th of January. And this one has not been ignored or struck off by the Trump administration. To what, according to you, is the motivation behind such a move?
No, I don't think there's any disagreement between the Trump administration and the Obama administration on issues relating to counterterrorism cooperation. In fact, I expect the Trump administration to take a much harder line against radical Islamic terrorism. I've heard several statements from the president himself. His national security advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, in his book, which was published in August last year, has in fact singled out Pakistan as a country with which the United States needs to do some tough talking. And therefore, I don't think that the Trump administration will dilute the counterterrorism approach of the Obama administration. In fact, my expectation is that the Trump administration will actually exert genuine pressure on countries which are known to provide sponsorship and support to terror outfits.
Right.
And I think Pakistan's actions in placing Azhar under house arrest, I think, are a response to that.
All right, Michael, do you agree with what Mr. Puri has said over here, and perhaps any other ways you think the Trump administration can take this forward? It's gone to the UN for one. What are the other things that it might do, according to your reading?
Yeah, well, I do agree with what was just said. You look at you look at the messaging coming from the White House, not just the new Trump White House, but the White House over the last few months of the Obama administration. And there were some very specific statements and messaging that highlighted the need for the U.S. and India to partner on dealing with terrorist groups in Pakistan that target India. And some of these statements specifically mentioned LET and also Jaish-e-Mohammed. So I think that in that sense, this is not a surprise. You know, as was just said, Trump, I think, will really take a very hard line on terrorism issues. If there's one thing we could predict about him, it's that he has a very black and white view on terror. He's not going to have any tolerance, or he's not going to want to have any tolerance for any country to provide space, sanctuary, much less support for groups that commit terrorism or that promote that type of thing. Now, to go back to what someone had mentioned earlier, I think it's important here to have a reality check that this is not a front burner priority for the Trump administration now, this issue of Masood Azhar and the UN and what China is doing. there's plenty of other things on the Trump administration's plate. So I don't think that we can expect tomorrow for the Trump administration to come up with a plan to take more measures to try to help sanction Masood Azhar. But I do think that this issue is not going to go away. It's going to stay on the radar here in the White House.
Right.
And even though it's hard to predict what exactly Trump is going to do in terms of his relationships with Pakistan, other countries in the region, I do think that this issue, this specific issue involving Masood Azhar, will stay on the radar for the foreseeable future.
Right. Ambassador Mukherjee, what do you feel, what would be the outcome of this move? Do you see the Trump administration not perhaps giving this issue and specifically that much more thrust, that much more attention in the days to come?
Actually, I'd like to broaden the issue itself. Let's not get fixated on Masood Azhar specifically as an individual. The point is Pakistan's use of its territory to support terrorism, Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism. I mean, you know, a reality check, as someone said. Let's get real. Number one, this Masood Azhar is a symptom of the overall problem, which is that the Pakistani state supports terrorism. Azhar and a number of others.
Right.
This is a well-known fact. It's recognized internationally, although not everyone takes action, you know, on this basis, or in fact, even some nations don't even put that on their priority list. There are only, the next reality check is there are only two countries which can conceivably impose the kind of pressure on Pakistan that would actually make it change or modify its policy on terrorism. One is the United States and one is China.
Right.
Of these two, India, I think, hopes for change in the United States. Because they know all about Pakistan's state sponsorship of terrorism. Congress recently has actually tabled a motion on declaring Pakistan's military as supporting terrorism and so on. I mean, they seem to be getting more and more
and also
put off.
India knows that China is not going to come on board.
So, in fact, this current, you know, move on Masood Azhar is a symptom of that also. So, and on the other hand, our relations with the United States are going very well in just about every sector of human endeavor. So, you know, we would actually have to intensify our diplomatic efforts, keeping in mind the fact that even if at some future date China feels embarrassed enough to lift its technical hold on Masood Azhar, he's not going to be handed over to us.
Right.
Pakistan has plenty of choices to stonewall this, to put him under house arrest as a PR exercise, to do various things that it has actually done in the past.
All right. All right, let me get in the last word from Mr. Dorsey. Mr. Dorsey, your closing comments on where this is headed.
Well, I think at the moment it's a status quo. We'll have to see what the Trump administration does. I agree that it's going to be much firmer on issues of political violence. What that means in terms of Pakistan remains to be seen. I noted that General Kelly, the Homeland Security Secretary, in testimony yesterday said that the list of those countries being banned at the moment from travel into the United States, if the ban is upheld by the courts, that list would not be expanded. So that's one area where the Pakistanis were afraid that they would be included, and that apparently is not going to happen.
All right. So a lot of it really depends from what we've talked about is that what the Trump administration will do. Will China in the days to come change its stance, which is highly unlikely? But India at this point certainly needs to intensify its diplomatic efforts, as Ambassador Mukherjee there put it. We'll have to wait and watch what happens as far as Maulana Masood Azhar is concerned, but we have to look at the larger problem here. Also a valid point. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me this evening on the discussion. Mr. Dorsey, Michael Kugelman, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, and Mr. Hardeep Puri. On that note, we're taking a very short break on Gravitas. When we return, more from the United States. Stay with us here on WION.